You see many of your colleagues that you know personally, excellent scientists and distinguished physicists and chemists and mathematicians, biologists, who affirmatively do not believe in God. And you know they are good people in their personal lives. They are committed scientists, and they really do seek to understand the nature of reality. Not polemicists, but really deeply sincere, private people. Does that ever give you pause for thought and potential doubt?
Potential doubt, of course, yes. But I have to say, I mean, there are doubting types, and there are types that don't doubt so much. And I happen to be, I was brought up in a home, and this has a huge influence on one. Let's be honest here. I was brought up in a home where belief in God was part of the normal everyday life, not as something that was spoken about very much, but it was a deeply held presupposition. So by the time I came into science, I was already a believer in God. And therefore, my faith and my science have grown up together as two very natural domains of my everyday life. And I think many other people have been brought up in a secular home where that wasn't the case. And I'm living now in Britain, which is a secular country. So it's not unexpected that many of my scientific colleagues would have a secular view on life. I think often people bring their presuppositions into their science, and then they tend to interpret their science afterwards. For the majority of people, that happens. But I can give you some exceptions for that, but so.
But that argument, it scares me, because I have feelings, maybe often, that I would like to believe in God, but maybe those feelings are culturally biased. Maybe they're biased because of what my mother wanted me to think, and because we find that although there may be traffic back and forth between people who were in religious homes versus non-religious homes, nonetheless, the way you were brought up has an effect on you. So I can never tell whether my feelings are biased.
I think the great thing about evolution, it's endowed us with brains that not only have this basic moral instinct, but allow us to take all of our beliefs out of the closet and to brush them down and to look at them, and they have to be justified. So I agree with you absolutely. We're all influenced by our cultural background, by our families and all that kind of thing. But I think the great thing is we can look at our intellectual beliefs and we can see if they're well justified or not. That's the beauty of having big frontal lobes. That's what they're there for, to do that kind of job. And I think every adult has this responsibility to do precisely that, and it doesn't matter if they have a religious background or an atheistic or whatever it might be. I think they should take a serious look at their beliefs, and they should actually critically examine them, and they should see if they have faith, if it's faith which is well justified. Now, to me, faith in God is a well-justified belief. There are plenty of intellectual, scientific indeed, and other reasons, historical reasons for why I believe in God. So this is evidence-based faith. I don't just believe because, that was what my parents thought. But obviously I'm influenced by that. Now, I'm interested that, I was interested to hear the other day that in China, for example, more people go to church in China on your average week than all the people in all the churches of Western Europe put together. Now, isn't that fascinating? That immediately tells us, that faith is not something which is simply, culturally imposed or imposed in a particular way, but people have gone out seeking faith and they found it. And I find that fascinating, actually. People are changing.
And I can give another explanation. I can explain how communism in its pure Marxist form, and it sounds very good, equality, everybody's equal, was really in the country. People deeply believed it in a religious way for decades. And in the last several decades, that's been removed. The market economy, I could tell a long story about that. And so religion is now replacing what communism was. So I can't say that is some innate human desire to find God. It may be just an innate human desire to have anything, and when one is taken away, something else is given. I don't know.
It might be more a case of suppressed transcendence, as it's called. I think what you find out in human societies is, okay, the state can suppress religion, it can suppress belief in God, it can put people in prison if they believe in God. But once that is lifted, then it's almost like there's a reversion, that this suppressed transcendence breaks out all over the place. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that actually religions are found in pretty much every culture of the world. There does seem to be this quest, to actually make meaning of life. And I think it's not simply, it has some evolutionary background, I'm sure about that, but it's much more than that. It's that people actually want to try and explain why they're there, what's it all about, what's the meaning for existence. It seems to me that's a very natural kind of question to ask. And indeed, they have to give some narrative to their lives that actually places them in some sort of context. That's the evidence of our daily lives that kind of pushes those questions upwards to the bigger questions, I think.
Speaking personally, I'm not interested in what works for me. I really want to know what's true. Now, that may sound silly, but I really want to know what's true. And what's fascinating is that in an age where clearly scientific knowledge has exploded over the last few decades, interest in religion has certainly not diminished, and if anything, is increasing in many different environments.
Yeah.
Now, that's a fact.
Yes.
And one can analyze that reaction to technology. People have different reactions. And one possibility is this transcendent, essential nature of human beings that's coming out maybe as a reaction to an overly technological world. Who knows?
Might be partly that. I think, though, that science and religion are kind of first cousins, actually. When you look back historically and you look at the emergence of science out of very much a theological framework, I don't think that framework's ever really been lost. Some people get the impression it has, but the framework of knowledge, the idea of unitary hypotheses, of course, the very ideas of laws. We first find those in Descartes and Newton, Robert Boyle. Very deeply religious people came up with the ideas of laws and so forth. So even the language we use in science, much of it is theological language, actually. Scientists don't realize that. They're actually using these concepts which came out of theology. And so I think it's a very natural affinity, actually, between science and faith for historical reasons. But I think also that with the sort of postmodern societies in which we live, I think you're right that those people, those religious people who say, well, actually there is a truth in the universe, there is a God who's actually made a coherent universe that we can understand, that's quite sort of hostile to very relativistic modes of thought that you get in some forms of postmodernity. So I think there's a kind of shared affinity between people of faith and people of science, because they are seeking truth together. They're on the common path together, I would say. And I think there's a deep historical reason for that.
Well, I am looking, I am committed, and I look to the future and kind of excited about how this process will continue to develop.
Well, I hope very much that your pilgrimage will come to fruition.